And now we're going to transition over to a video of a speaker by the name of Brian Kaloris. He is a member of the Socialist Alternative and the Movement for the 99%, formerly called Movement for Bernie. I happened to attend an evening called the Resistance Summit that was sponsored by a bunch of different groups. And of the speakers, and I did some interviews, as I mentioned at the top of the show, with Jill Stein and Chase Iron Eyes and Chris Hedges, the most electrifying speech, I thought, and the person that I was most excited about was this young. To play for you his presentation now, and then after that, we're going to come back with my interview with Kshama Sawant.
What we've seen today and this weekend is only the tip of the iceberg. 500,000 people in Washington, D.C., 500,000 people in Los Angeles, I got the report. Rallies all around the country, all around the world, in South Africa, in India, 250,000 people marching in London against Trump. This is only the tip of the iceberg. I want to mention as well, socialist students with walkouts at over 40 campuses across the country yesterday, because young people historically have been at the forefront of revolutionary events. And it's not just young people historically, it's this generation. Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, the 15 struggle. Bernie Sanders' campaign was overwhelmingly a youth movement. And there's a coming new women's liberation movement and new immigrant resistance that, again, young people will be at the forefront of. And this will only continue and intensify, not just because young people are historically at the front of struggle, but because of what this generation faces. Low-wage jobs, student debt, environmental destruction on a scale never seen before. One of the first generations to ever do worse economically than their parents. But people don't just radicalize and move into action when things are bad for them. It's also that this generation's hopes were raised. What were we told when Obama got elected? That we lived in a post-racial society. What has happened? The gunning down of black folks every day in this country by the police or by right-wing vigilantes. We were told also that Hillary's campaign was going to end sexism. And what do we have as a result of this election? We have a political establishment that's paved the way for a president who glorifies sexual assault and promises to overturn Roe v. Wade. There were expectations built up for young people, and those have come crashing down on the shores of the capitalist reality that we live under. I think one thing that's important about what socialist students did Friday and the actions that were taken was that these walkouts were disruptive. They confronted business as usual. I'm all for the types of marches that happened around the country today, where we all gather together with a permit and we march from point A to point B with a unified message. But also, that's just part of what needs to happen. We need to disrupt. We need to block highways. We need to shut down schools. We need to shut down corporate profits. Business as usual is what got us here, right? Trying to rely on a milquetoast leadership of the Democratic Party to stop virulent, racist, right-wing populism did not stop virulent, racist, right-wing populism, right? It's the establishment that's devalued life of people of color for so long that could pave the way for this rhetoric of Trump. It's the establishment that's propped up bullies of occupying armies in the streets that has now gotten a bully in charge of this country. It's an establishment that's told us for so long that billionaires know best for us that now has put a demagogic billionaire into office. They paved the road for him, and that's why I think to fight right-wing populism, we can't rely on the Democratic Party. We need a new party for working-class people. I think we need a new party to fight Trump, because it's precisely that Democratic Party leadership that he points to whip up his base, to mislead people down this reactionary road. And I think to not only win those people over, but to fight effectively against that rhetoric, right, we need a new force. Right now, I know there are folks like Tim who are out on the streets fighting, but right now, what do people see who are afraid of Trump's agenda on TV about what the mainstream Democrats are saying to them? They see Hillary Clinton at Trump's inauguration, right? Yeah. They see Obama meeting with him to try and give him advice on how to rule better in order to deport immigrants, because Obama knows something about that, right? And that's why we need to be able to present something that speaks clearly for working class people and does not try to serve two masters and do like Tim did and and Shama and Jill, and refuses to take a dime in corporate cash. We can't depend on the establishment. We need to mobilize from below with determined action. I want to give one example of that type of determined action we need that I think is very relevant today. A few weeks ago, there was an attack on reproductive rights. Sound familiar? In Poland. And women went on strike. The majority of women went on strike in the country and occupied the main squares in the cities. March 8th is International Women's Day. It's the 100th anniversary of the women that went on strike that kicked off the Russian Revolution. I think March 8th needs to be a flashpoint for our movements. And I think this speaks to what Chase was saying, but I think it speaks to all the struggles against the Trump agenda. The fight against defunding Planned Parenthood, the fight against overturning Roe v. Wade cannot just be left to the women's movement. It needs to be a fight of all of us that are opposing Trump's agenda. I think March 8th should be a flashpoint of determined resistance, but also May Day we should look to. In 2006, there was a day without an immigrant that shut down the port in Los Angeles, that shut down cities across the country. But the problem was that the labor movement as a whole did not back up those immigrants and also take strike action, also take determined action. And I think this time around, May Day cannot just be a day without an immigrant, but it needs to be met with the slogan, an injury to one is an injury to all, and all of us that oppose Trump's agenda need to stop every single deportation and need to get behind every immigrant organization and working class movement on May Day this year. It hasn't been talked about enough, but it's not just women, LGBT people, it's not just immigrants that are on the chopping block with the Trump agenda. The labor movement itself is going to face a slow chipping away from the Trump administration that eventually wants to lead to right to work, which we call right to work for less, which essentially means the destruction of the labor movement as we know it. That is on the agenda for Trump's administration, right? But the unfortunate situation is that most of the labor leaders are already preparing as if this right-to-work legislation is already passed. They're laying off organizers across the country. They're preparing for the loss of dues that would come from right to work. Instead of that, there needs to be a preparation to resist, a preparation to educate, a preparation to defy. The labor movement in this country has the power to shut down major metropolitan areas, has the power to shut down infrastructure, and that's what should be viably threatened when right to work is put on the agenda. We can make Trump's agenda crumble. It won't be easy. Chris outlined the forces we're up against, but we can. We can go on the offense and win. Anyone who doesn't believe it should listen to what Jill said. Again, what Jill said about the Nixon administration. Environmental protection, end of the Vietnam War, Roe versus Wade, a series of offensive labor struggles for benefits, for increased wages, right? All under the one of the most reactionary administrations in memory.
Thanks, Ralph Nader.
We should also remember that Richard Nixon resigned in disgrace. And we can build a movement that can do the same. This won't be easy. because of what our enemy has. And just mocking Trump, or certainly mocking his supporters, is not going to get it done. We need more than that. Relying on politicians is not going to get it done. Remember the Clinton years when movements were demobilized and we saw mass incarceration, the trade deals that now Trump is building his base around, people that are upset with the Clinton trade deals, ending welfare as we know it, etc. And that's why I think an independent political force along with these movements is absolutely necessary. But we also should see the possibility for a successful fight back. The establishment is divided in a way that I haven't seen since I've been an activist for 20 years. The two main repressive forces in the world, the CIA and the FBI, one took out Clinton, and the other's trying to take out Trump, right? The establishment is divided, and as Chase said, we need unity. We can't leave the women's organizations alone to fight for reproductive rights. We can't leave the immigrant organizations alone to fight to end deportations, and the same goes for all the other struggles. We need maximum unity. For those of us in this room, that means also you've got to be welcoming to people who aren't as woke as you. Right? I think we need disruptive, determined action. But if you just break windows at a Starbucks with no message about what exactly you're fighting for, if you just use big academic words that won't welcome people, right? That's not the type of determined action that's going to bring folks in. We're going to need to do determined action alongside not just folks like Tim who think that the Democratic Party should be reformed. We need to unite and build actions together. But also folks who've never been to a demonstration before, right? They're coming to their first thing because their neighbor might get deported or because they're just afraid for what could go on in their community, right? And we need to fight alongside those people and also they may look up to folks we don't look up to, right? And we're going to need to fight to bring those people into the movement to have that debate and discussion about the tactics that are necessary to win. So I've been going on too long, I'm just going to wrap up. But in that situation, we need to be able to draw a line. If we're going to unite with people in movements who want to support the Democrats, or maybe who are former Trump supporters, right? Or say a whole bunch of things we don't agree with, we need to be able to draw a line at a place that also makes the movement effective. And not subordinate the needs of our struggles against Trump, the needs of the struggles of immigrants or women against Trump, to what the Democratic Party finds acceptable. I think there are ways to do this. One is with concrete demands. If March 8th was to start with the concrete demand of defend and extend reproductive rights, connecting that to other needs working class people have, I think that would be a huge step forward. If on May 1st we demand no deportations and full legalization for all immigrant workers, I think that would be a huge step forward and a huge call that everyone could unite around. And we also not just need clear demands, but we need actions that can win these things. And I think that includes electoral action, as Shum has shown in Seattle, outside the Democratic Party. Along with that, we need patient explanation to people who aren't there with us yet. But we should make no mistake about our difficult and complicated tasks. We can win. Trump has talked about the agenda for his first 100 days. Our first 100 days should be an agenda of escalating resistance with flashpoints on March 8th, International Women's Day, and on May 1st, May Day, of determined resistance and disruption of business as usual. We need to center our actions on mobilizing people from below, on the power of the working class, on demands that resonate with people, but also reach beyond what capitalism and their two parties want to give us. We can win against Trump and his whole billionaire class, and that includes being bold. Right now, some folks might have been anti-capitalist for a while and you're used to sort of not saying it much. Right now, young people are joining socialist organizations and subscribing to socialist publications by the thousands and tens of thousands. Let's be bold about what we stand for. The Trump victory may have dealt us lemons, but we can make a cocktail of resistance, revolt, radicalization, and revolutionary politics. We should all get organized, join, and build the struggle against capitalism.
I'm going to leave a little bit of a pause, and I'm after inauguration.
And
resist and I'm going to I'm going to leave. So, okay. So welcome back to the Robust Opposition. I'm here with a person that I admire very much, Kshama Sawant, who is the Socialist City Council member from Seattle, Washington. And she's also the founder of the Movement for the 99%, formerly known as the Movement for Bernie. Welcome to our show.
thank you for having me, Lauren.
Sure. So we just watched Brian's speech, which I was at, where I last saw you, the day after inauguration, the day of the Women's March. And I was very enthusiastic about everything that he said, because I too believe that we need to resist and disrupt. And it's more than just writing letters to our congressmen and, you know, having these marches that are not connected to any strategy. So I've got a series of questions that I want to ask you. And the first is, he mentioned a new party for working class people. And I was wondering if you were aware that a campaign just launched. I'm actually on the steering committee of it, and it's called Draft Bernie for a People's Party. And the campaign is not to develop the party or the platform. It is simply to draft Bernie, because we feel he is the only person with the stature and the following in the United States right now to make a third party effective. I'm wondering what you think of that campaign.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge what a tremendous service to our movement it was to have someone like Bernie Sanders running, calling for a political revolution against the billionaire class, you know, really inspiring working people, young people, and millennials around real demands that our movement has, that our society needs. $15 an hour for everyone, Medicare for all, full protection to the LGBTQ community, to women's reproductive rights. I mean, this is the kind of movement that people are looking for. However, I don't think this is about a person. I completely agree that we need high-profile individuals to give of themselves to the movement. That is absolutely correct. But at the same time, I think it is important for our movement of the 99%, to start not from a person, but from the needs of the movement itself. So what does our movement need? I think the paramount importance right now is for our movement to build a united struggle of the 99% of the grassroots against Trump's bigoted and billionaire-dominated agenda. And in addition to standing together against all the spectrum of attacks that he has launched, you know, with the idea that an injury to one is an injury to all, we also have to have a movement that puts forward audacious demands, you know, demands that we have $15 an hour for all workers, demands that we have full unionization rights, demands that there's no bans, no wall, no deportations, full legalization for immigrants. And we have to demand also addressing sexual violence, addressing other oppressions in our community. But if we are to truly do that, if we are to truly force Trump to back down on his attacks on our community members, if we are to truly take that movement forward on these other demands that we want to win because we have a different vision for society, then what do we need? First of all, we need a united movement of the 99%, but we need for this movement to be militant, combative, and base itself on the needs of the working class and not on what's acceptable to the corporate establishment of either of the two big business parties. And I think one of the things that we saw so revealingly throughout the election campaign of the presidential year is that even though so many millions were inspired by Bernie's message. At the end of the day, we saw an election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And if we are to truly bring forward millions of people in the struggle against Trump, then our movement has to have the spirit that we saw, for example, at the airport actions a week and a half ago, where in response to the Muslim ban, to the egregious Muslim ban, in response to the fact that ordinary people were being held as detainees or being deported, ordinary working people, over 100,000 of us, came out in all our airports, including at SeaTac Airport, where I was personally there from start to finish. And what I witnessed was the blossoming of a movement that is willing to stand with Muslims, stand with immigrants, but take on a nonviolent civil disobedience, direct action to fight against Trump. It is that kind of militancy that we're going to need if we're going to win against Trump. And we have to base ourselves in the need of that for our movement. And I welcome everybody who supports our movement against Trump into the struggle. I think we have to build a united struggle with all people on the left. We have to build with ordinary working people, young people on campuses. We have to invite progressive Democrats, Sanders voters, Greens, socialists, everybody. But the bottom line has to be for our movement that we will not back down in what is acceptable to corporate Democrats. We have to build a fighting movement, and everybody who is willing to build that struggle.
Okay, well, I totally agree with you, and I think it needs to be militant, and we all know, and Bernie Sanders said enough times, that it's not the politicians that initiate the change, it's the social movements led by the grassroots. And he has urged us to go out and create that movement. And one of the meetings that I came from today is we just started a local chapter of Our Revolution, which is his successor organization to his campaign. I was wary of starting that because I was waiting to see whether it was going to be a top-down organization like the campaign was, or whether it was going to be bottom-up. And it really took me going to DC and meeting with one of their organizers there to find out that, yes, it was going to be a little bit of both. They have some national things that they're working on, such as their Sanctuary Cities campaign led by Erica Andiola, who moved from the campaign to Our Revolution. And they also want to hear what we're doing. So we in our meeting today talked about the issues that we can fight on that are very strategic, because we believe that people need wins. They need to fight on issues that are current, where there's enough support, and where we can win. And so we kind of consensus on the fact that we would try to get Los Angeles to be a sanctuary city, and we would get the support from Our Revolution National on that. We would try to get Los Angeles to divest from Wells Fargo in the way that you just did, and I'm going to be asking you about that. And that we also want to get single payer for California, because the nurses union is working on that. They just had a call. They had 180 people on that call, many, many people in that coalition. And with Donald Trump, you know, vowing to replace and repeal and replace Obamacare, this is what we want to do. So the time is now. We don't want to just be resisting and being reactive. We want to be proposing things that are positive that we can do. So I wanted to talk to you about that, and also how you get the left groups out of their own silos. I have long been frustrated by the fact that the women's reproductive rights movement work on their own, the environmental movement works on its own, the labor movement works on its own, et cetera, et cetera. And you know, when we're divided, we fail. So what techniques or tips can you give for uniting these different movements?
I think your everything that you framed, I think they're including many, many important points that we need to be aware of in our movement. And as you said, first of all, as you said earlier, we can't build just protest marches and rallies endlessly, because there will be fatigue from that as well. We need strategy, and that strategy, I think, has to have elements of what you said. You know, first of all, part of the strategy is building a broad coalition on the 99%. And as I said before, we do need that. But well, the way I would say it is we need a united movement, a movement that is united in action on the ground, meaning we, first of all, start with a program. So as you said, divesting from Wells Fargo, defeating the Dakota Access Pipeline, single-payer healthcare, $15 an hour. This is a real program of demands. And I could not agree with you more, Lauren, that we can't just be on the defense. In reality, if we are to inspire millions into the struggle, we need positive demands. And that's why I think these demands are critical in building the base of the movement and really inspiring people into action. We can't just be saying we're against Donald Trump's executive order of this or that. We have to say this is a vision for society that we have, and our vision includes combating inequality, fighting against Wall Street, fighting for living wages, fighting for healthcare. So I completely agree. And the starting point of our movement has to be that program. What are we actually fighting for? And then the strategy of the movement should be guided by what it takes to achieve that. And I know that Bernie Sanders has announced, I think, a day of action for February 25th. Be out there on the streets, joining that call and demanding action from the politicians, demanding that we have our voices heard. And I know you're going to talk about the Dakota Access Pipeline in a second, so I don't want to go too much into it now. But I think the lessons of the airport actions and the lessons of our success with the Wells Fargo divestment really tell us that ultimately, as a strategy for this movement, is that we be independent of anything that is limiting in our ability to fight for our program of demand. So we have to base our movement strength in what it needs to fight for and win these demands, not what's acceptable to the business as usual framework of US politics. And that's why I think another point that you made, Lauren, which is really important and bears repetition, is we have in our organizations. It's really important that we have truly not top down, but democratic structures in our organizations, political organizations, because without that, we won't be able to build a strategy for winning any of these demands of, even defending our rights, let alone winning a better society. And one of the reasons that I'm able to be effective on the city council is because I'm not a lone activist, and neither am I a member of a party whose establishment opposes my agenda. I am part of Socialist Alternative, in which our membership are united in our agenda for social justice to push forward for these audacious reforms, as we are talking about $15 an hour and Medicare for all and so on. And within our organizations, we discuss and debate and strategize on a democratic basis. That is the kind of platform that working class people need if we are to push our agenda ahead.
Now, I have a question to you. I went to one of these Move On George Soros financed protests outside of Dianne Feinstein's office. And I saw people that clearly were not activists. I started interviewing them. Most of them had never been to a protest before. Most of them, or those that had, it hadn't been since the Vietnam War. A lot of them looked very upper middle class. And so I then started asking who they voted for in the primary. And it turned out it was all Hillary supporters. And one of the speakers was actually disdaining the white working class voters in the flyover states, basically calling them racist for, voting for Trump, which I believe is the opposite. I think a lot of them were Obama voters that realized that Obama's neoliberal agenda wasn't working for them, and therefore they were willing to take a chance with Trump. If Bernie had been the nominee, he would have been elected. But, I think it's a very big mistake to ignore the Trump voter, and also, as much as I can't stand them, the Hillary supporter, the ones that were asleep during the 8 years of Obama and excused every bad thing that he did, or didn't know about all the bad things he did simply because he was a Democrat. And I know that you and I are always working with the same people, and I wonder how we avoid kind of preaching to the choir, and if you have any tips for reaching out to Trump voters and Hillary voters to bring them into this big tent.
Right. I think that's a really, really critical point to address. I think, first of all, if the left, the US left, is to succeed in this era, not only in fighting against Trump, but building a movement to, to combat climate change, to really win a different kind of society, then we are going to have to understand that condescending towards any activist does not help. And as a matter of fact, I will illustrate the Women's March that happened the day after inauguration as a key example. On that day, the day after inauguration, on Saturday, January 21st, we saw nearly 3 million people, many of them women, march on the streets of Washington, D.C., Seattle, and other cities. This was, by all accounts, the largest protest day ever in US history. And many of them were carrying Hillary Clinton signs. But what's happening right now is that regardless of which Democratic candidate people voted for, right now, what we are united on is our desire to fight back against Trump and the billionaire class. So on the one hand, you have Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the House minority, saying that it's our responsibility to find common ground with Trump. I don't see that mood among ordinary working people. What I see, and I spend most of my days and evenings with ordinary working people who are politicizing, radicalizing as we speak. And they are in no mood to negotiate with a bigoted billionaire-backed agenda. There is a deep hunger in American society to fight back. And in order to actually build a movement to fight back, it is really important that we build a united struggle on the bottom. So it doesn't matter whether you voted for Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders, or you voted for Jill Stein. We have to stand united in our fight against Trump. And as I said before, base our movement around the actual program of demands that we are fighting for. So it's not a question of appeasing any section of the establishment. It's a question of what does our movement need in order to win social and economic and racial justice for our people in the 99%, and proceed from that point and urge everyone who agrees with that program to join with us in the struggle and not set up artificial barriers. It doesn't matter if you voted for Hillary Clinton. Most Hillary Clinton supporters are actually fighting for a decent society. So let's fight together. I know socialists and Greens are fighting for that. Let's fight together. But at the same time, let's have an open dialogue where we debate and discuss openly about strategy. And yes, there will be differences on strategy. We cannot artificially make them go away, and we should not be dishonest towards one another. Socialist Alternative and I are very open about our politics, our standpoint, and we don't believe that working within the Democratic Party will enable the working class to build the kind of movement we're trying to build. But at the same time, we are extremely open, and we want to work with those of the people who are working within the Democratic Party to build a movement on the ground, because that's of paramount importance. And that's the approach we need to use. As you said, Lauren, it's also to reach out to Trump supporters. I don't think that that's going to happen overnight. But what is going to happen as the months go is that Trump, as we all had predicted, is going to deeply betray the millions of people who voted for him on the basis that he was going to, remember, he said, drain the swamp. He promised his supporters that he was against corporations, against the lobbyists, and he was going to bring a different kind of politics in Washington, D.C. But we know that's not true. We know that he's not only bringing a message of bigotry and anti-immigrant hysteria, he is also going to deeply attack the rights of workers. Just days ago, he's been issuing executive orders for deregulation of Wall Street. This is going to wreak havoc on living standards of working people and make even more enormous profits for Wall Street and the billionaire class. So while being unbending on the question of racism, sexism, homophobia, and bigotry, and while being completely in solidarity with immigrants and our Muslim sisters and brothers, while being completely non-negotiating on the rights of women for their reproductive health and for healthcare, while doing all of that, we have to reach out to those who voted for Trump on the basis that he was going to stand with them and not with Wall Street, because they are, in the months coming, they're going to be looking for a different political home because they're going to be betrayed by Trump. And so what we need to do is build maximum unity in action on the ground around a program of demands that we clearly agree on.
Okay, great. I know we don't have a lot of time left, so I want to just go a little bit into the momentous thing that you were able to achieve this week
which is getting the city of Seattle to divest $3 billion from Wells Fargo. Tell us how that happened, how you built power, who your supporters were, and what the obstacles were, and how you overcame them.
I think the story, the narrative of how we won the divestment of the city of Seattle from Wells Fargo is really instructive for our movement. The genesis of all of this, of course, is completely with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and all the activists who have personally fought on the ground in Standing Rock in North Dakota, facing down blizzards, attack dogs, rubber bullets, and this of the police and paramilitary of the privately owned corporations. And it was through the inspiration that was put forward by them that the movement in Seattle also developed, the No DAPL movement in Seattle, or the No Dakota Access Pipeline movement, which has been holding mass rallies and marches for the last several months. And in solidarity with my fellow activists in the No DAPL Seattle movement, I put forward this legislation on November 1st of last year. And what happened was that the primarily corporate Democrat-dominated city council sat on this legislation for 2 months. We didn't see any action, but we were finally able to bring this to committee and bring a discussion and a vote because the movement has been so strong that we refused to back down. We refused to go away. We packed City Hall over and over again. We had a mass rally of nearly 1,000 people at the Wells Fargo near City Hall in downtown, and demanded that city council members show action. If they say that they are against Trump, then rhetoric and platitudes are not enough. We need to see action. We need to see them put their money where their mouth is. And it was purely through the strength of the grassroots movement that we were able to win. But the reason this movement was able to prevail is that the movement did not limit itself to what's acceptable to corporate politicians. The movement is independent of that influence, and that is what made it successful. And so my message to all my fellow activists who are watching this, if you want to fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline, if you want to build a real movement against the oil lobby, you want to fight against climate change, you want to build a better society, our starting point is to build a united, independent movement of the 99% on the ground, where we determine strategy and tactics based on what is necessary for us to win our demands for a better society, not what's acceptable to corporate Democrats, and that is going to work.
Now, Wells Fargo is a particularly bad actor because in addition to being one of the 17 banks that funds the Dakota Access Pipeline, it also fraudulently foreclosed upon people during the financial collapse or prior to the financial collapse, and it engaged in those predatory sales practices where they made their $12 an hour tellers sell financial products to customers, and they were opening up fraudulent accounts because otherwise they would be fired or their pay would be docked. And then I found out in my research that from you that they also finance private prisons, and they're also being sued by there's a lawsuit because they've denied student loans to immigrants that are not citizens, but they're here on a work-study program authorized by Obama. So do we need a particular villain like that in order to make this happen? Because as you mentioned, all banks are bad. What we should have is a public bank, and I'm also working in that movement to get a state-owned bank in California. You know, and ultimately capitalism itself is the problem.
I think that needs to be a very clarifying aspect of our movement. No doubt that Wells Fargo is not a bad apple in a basket full of good apples. As you said, Lauren, all these banking corporations that dominate Wall Street and dominate the corridors of government are, all of them are examples of why the system of capitalism itself does not work for us in the 99%. The system of capitalism is incredibly productive in generating private profits for the billionaire class, while it leaves the rest of us languishing in plummeting living standards. And as you said, student debt, the student debt is now over $1 trillion. We are struggling for our basic needs to be satisfied. And it doesn't have to be this way. The United States and the entire world, indeed, is so rich in natural resources, in labor productivity, in technology and clinical capability, that we could harness all of this energy, all of this creativity to deliver high standards of living to every living being, every human being in an environmentally sustainable manner. But that is not going to happen on the basis of capitalism. And you're absolutely right about that, Lauren, which is why I'm a socialist and I'm a member of Socialist Alternative, because we believe as socialists that it's not going to be enough to fight only for reforms under capitalism, as hard as it will be, because the billionaire class will oppose us every step of the way. They will fight tooth and nail against us, even in the most basic of reforms. But as hard as it will not be enough to fight for reforms. We have to build a movement against capitalism itself, and we need for the socialist movement to be the backbone of this organizing of the 99%, by the 99%, for the 99%. But at the same time, we need, everyday tactics in the here and now to inspire people into the struggle, which means that one of the needs of building this movement to fight against capitalism and towards socialism also requires us to bring people into the struggle around concrete demands. So $50 an hour, for example, we don't believe that that is enough for families to live on, but it is a demand that we saw that a majority of workers were coalescing around and were willing to come out on the streets and fight for it. And the experience of fighting for 15 was so educational to all of us to understand that the big business class and the politicians who stand with them are against us. And if we are to win even modest demands like 15, we're going to have to carry out an almighty struggle. The fight against Wells Fargo and the fight for divestment from Wells Fargo is in the same nature, in the sense that we don't believe that Wells Fargo alone can be defeated and then everything will be, great. Of course not. We believe that the entire financial oligarchy that supports the oil lobby needs to be vanquished. But that can only be done if we build our movement from the ground up and bring in millions of people who are willing to struggle with us. And the process of doing that has to be through inviting people into the struggle around concrete demands like divesting from Wells Fargo, and then going on to, really attacking the Dakota Access Pipeline itself, and then using those movements around those concrete demands to also using those movements as an opportunity to discuss with people about why it won't be enough and why people should join Socialist Alternative and why people should build a socialist movement itself.
Okay, that's my last question. You led me right into it. I want to know, is Socialist Alternative a national movement? If so, how can they join it? If not, how can someone start a local chapter? And specifically, if someone wants to get involved with the flashpoint actions that you were mentioning or that Brian was mentioning in March and May, how is the organizing going on for that, and how can people get involved?
First of all, on the actions, as you said, Lauren, Socialist Alternative is calling for various organizations and institutions on the left to join us in calling for mass direct action, nonviolent civil disobedience on March 8th, which is International Women's Day. I believe it will be an international day of actions, and I believe it can be huge. I believe it can be incredible, but it's not going to happen automatically. So we have to hunker down and work towards it, mobilize tens of thousands of people around to come out and act. And May 1st, Socialist Alternative is calling on the labor movement, unions, to put out a call for strike actions, concerted strike actions nationwide that we can really inspire people with. And in order to build for that, as I said, we need unity among the 99%, but we also need a willingness to be militant. So, taking strike actions in the workplace, shutting down highways, shutting down schools. We're going to have to do that. This is what the movement against the Vietnam War, the movement for reproductive rights, the movement for environmental rights, and the movement for Black freedom, this is what they did in the 60s and 70s. And we're going to have to build a similar courageous momentum in our movement today if we are to achieve our goals. And in order to do that, I invite anybody who's watching this, if you're excited by this prospect of building the struggle this year, building actions on March 8th and May 1st, divesting your city from Wells Fargo, feel free to contact my office for those actions. And if you're interested in socialism, and if you're interested in socialist alternative and building the socialist movement with us, I invite you to join Socialist Alternative. Go to socialistalternative.org. Contact our fellow activists in many cities. Yes, we are a nationwide organization. We're based in Seattle, Philadelphia, Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York City, Boston, and many other cities. And if you want to start a local branch of Socialist Alternative, we can help you do that as well. Just contact us on our website, socialistalternative.org, and we'll go from there.
In those actions, you said contact your office. What's
you can just Google my name, Shama Sawant, on Google and Seattle City Council, and you'll find me. Or you can email me at kshama.sawant@seattle.gov. That's KSHAMA.SAWANT@seattle.gov.
Okay, one final question. I know I said that was the final question, but are you guys participating in the general strike that's coming up on Friday? I know we're organizing something here in Los Angeles where people are being asked not to go to work, not to go to school, and not to shop.
I believe Socialist Alternative will be out there in solidarity. I would also urge that for us to organize successful general strike actions will take a lot of preparation, a lot of mobilizing. So in addition to the actions that have already been introduced for Saturday, February 17th, I urge people to get involved with us so that we can really seriously mobilize for major strike actions on May 1st.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure. I find you tremendously inspiring, and I'm going to be participating in both of these actions, or at least trying to get my groups to. So, and also trying to get Los Angeles to divest from Wells Fargo.
That'll be incredible, Lauren. If you all are able to build a movement to divest Los Angeles from Wells Fargo, that'll be a huge step forward for the No DAPL movement.
Yeah, they've sort of started that with ACE, the Alliance for Community Empowerment, and the Committee for Better Banks. There's already a better, what do you call it, a responsible banking ordinance that was during Occupy, and we're trying to work through that. But anyway, thanks again for coming on our show. Shama, have a great rest of your weekend, and I hope to see you soon.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Lauren.
I am here with Tim Canova, who we all know and love. Tim was a Bernie-crat who ran for Congress against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who we all know and hate, in the state of Florida. And unfortunately, he lost his race, but he has stayed involved. And I last saw him on a live stream the other night of a forum with the Florida Democratic Party state chair race. And as people who watch my show, The Robust Opposition, know, we had Bruce Jacobs, Dr. Mae Christian, and Stacey Patel on a couple of weeks ago to talk about that travesty. So I have a lot to talk to you about, Tim, but first let me switch the camera around, and I'm going to give you the mic while I do that, and then I'm going to ask you my questions. Sure. Why don't you say hi to our live stream audience?
Hi, live stream audience. Nice to be with you.
Okay, I'm switching the camera around.
Okay.
All right, so I've got Tim Canova here. Let me do this now. Okay, so I've got Tim Canova here, and first of all, I want to thank you for running. Tell me what possessed you to run for Congress?
Well, oh wow, just a moment. I was feeling the burn, you can say. I got swept up in Bernie's campaign and saw the way the DNC was treating Bernie. At the same time that I was working with a group in South Florida called the Citizens Trade Campaign against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So we were already very upset with our Congresswoman, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, because of her record, the way she was not representing the district well. She was taking a lot of corporate money. She was pushing for the TPP, for fast-tracking it. And the more we looked, we saw that she's been taking millions of dollars from big Wall Street banks and big corporations Then at the same time, there she is at the head of the DNC trying to block Bernie. So that's why I stepped up.
And tell me what kind of support you got when all was said and done.
Support was fantastic, actually. First of all, we renounced the idea of taking a penny from any corporate interests, and the grassroots was there for us. We got more than 200,000 individual contributions of $17 each. So we had a lot of resources, and we spent it on the ground. We had 4 field offices in my district alone, and we had hundreds of volunteers and field organizers knocking on doors every day. We were knocking on 10,000 doors a week by the end of the race. So the establishment was still against us, and it was a closed primary. So that made it very uphill.
What percentage of the vote did you get?
They say we got 43.5%. We're looking into the circumstances of the ballot counting. There have been some statistical analysis done that suggests the vote might have been flipped on us. I didn't want to believe it was possible, but it's possible. And at the same time, we requested the supervisor of elections to turn over the digital scanned images of the ballots, and we were just informed they never did digital scanned imaging, which seems to be a violation of state election law. So a lot of underhanded stuff could have been happening at the end.
Now, were you disappointed that after Bernie endorsed Hillary and started playing ball with the Democratic Party that he did not come to Florida and campaign for you?
Well, of course, everybody was disappointed. We were looking forward to having Bernie there to campaign with us. I'm sure he had his constraints. I don't think it made a difference for the outcome, to tell you the truth. We had it well organized. If we didn't win, I wouldn't blame it on Bernie not coming.
Now tell us about the state of politics in Florida, because I know there's a lot of bad stuff going on. There's the Sable pipeline that's going through. Was there not an attempt to ban fracking bans in Florida, or am I confusing that with another state?
No, fracking is a big issue there right now. Rick Perry, when he dropped out of the presidential race, apparently moved to the Panhandle in Florida, started lobbying the Tallahassee, the legislature in Tallahassee, to try to bring fracking to Florida. I think 75 county and cities around Florida have passed resolutions to recommend a ban on fracking, and still the state legislature hasn't gone there. There's been legislation introduced to ban fracking, but it's a Republican-dominated legislature. So we have a group called Progress for All. Your viewers can go to progressforall.org and check it out. And we're trying to organize a statewide referendum to ban fracking. And we've had some good experience with referendums in Florida in the past year. It requires 60% of the voters to pass a referendum. We passed a medical marijuana referendum. We passed a solar referendum, and we beat back an industry-financed initiative that would have rolled back solar. So we're going to try to do it at the state level. And at the same time, you mentioned the Sable Trail Pipeline. This is a 500-mile, $3 billion project, which would move 1.6 billion gallons of fracked gas a day. And it goes right through a very important area of the state because it's not just crossing some major rivers, but also goes through sinkhole country. And once the sinkhole opens up underneath one of these, underneath part of the pipeline, it's going to break right open. It's going to pollute the aquifer. And that's what we're fighting for right now, is to make sure the drinking water of Florida remains drinkable. We've had, because of rising sea levels from climate change, we've had saltwater intrusion into the aquifer in South Florida. And then Florida Power and Light, big monster corporation, just got permission to store its radioactive wastewater underneath the water table. So everyone's playing Russian roulette with the aquifer. And from what we gather, the water companies, the big water giants, are also in league with the fracking companies. So,
yeah, this is the situation that we have in California, of course. I've been fighting fracking and the TPP since 2012, so you and I come from the same place. We're both activists on the issues. And anyway, in the Central Valley, we have a drought situation, although now with the rains we've been getting for the past month or so, I think we're out of the drought finally. Our reservoirs have been almost completely replenished. But what happened was the small family farmers were forced to tap their groundwater because the big frackers and the big oil companies were taking all the fresh water. And the ground was subsiding because the water table was going down. And the other thing that's happening is Chevron is treating, quote unquote, toxic fracking wastewater and then selling it to farmers to water their crops. And as you probably know, California is the breadbasket of the nation. So everybody is like a guinea pig because they're drinking this, they're eating these crops that have been watered with supposedly treated toxic fracking wastewater. So there's a campaign, Californians Against Fracking as a campaign to try to stop that. But, you know, we have the expression Standing Rock is everywhere, and it really is because, you know, everybody likes to praise Obama for his decision on the Keystone North, not recognizing that he actually fast-tracked the Keystone South, as well as many other pipelines and other infrastructure projects. You know, fracking quadrupled under Obama, not under Texas oil man Governor George Bush. So, you know, a lot of people don't understand that.
And when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, you could say she made the world safe for fracking. We started to push fracking all over the world in a lot of other countries. You know, the way Florida has dealt with fracking is last year, Governor Rick Scott, his administration started to gut the water standards in Florida. So there's now higher permissible levels of methane and other toxic chemicals that are found in the fracking process. Yeah.
So tell us your thoughts on this governor's race, because in the end, a few days after our show, Battelle apparently won. Bruce Jacobs still has his, you know, lawsuit. What's happening next?
Yeah, that's you said governor's race, but of course
I meant the state party chair,
the Democratic state party chair in Florida. It was an interesting race. I mean, the establishment remains in control in Florida. There was Stephen Battelle, a multimillionaire investor who supported Wasserman Schultz. He's been very friendly with her for many years. And he was running against four other candidates who tried to put up a united front against him. I tried to stay out of it for as long as I could because I wanted to host a forum to really put them on the spot. And we held that forum, and the forum was very revealing. It showed Battelle as somebody who has not found the corporate interest he wouldn't take money from. He keeps promising to increase the money going to the state party from $3 million a year to $30 million a year. Let's see if he does. You know, I pointed out at that forum and many times that Hillary Clinton outspent Donald Trump by 2 to 1. Money's not the problem in the way that it's being described by the establishment. The problem is a lack of a message and a lack of credibility. You know, a lot of voters, they hear the talk from the Democrats, but the Democrats talk the talk. They don't walk the walk too often. And, you know, it goes back to some of those environmental issues. You know, the Republicans have a lot of deniers, right? Climate change deniers. Well, the Democrats have a lot of climate change hypocrites, you can say. They'll talk about how climate change is such an existential threat. If it is such an existential threat, they should have thrown the filibuster out the window when they controlled the House and Senate. They shouldn't have been giving green lights to fracking and pipelines. And I think millennials see through this in particular. And this generation of millennials, it's not a generation where you can say, vote for the lesser of two evils. They just won't vote. And it's not just millennials. I think a lot of people are fed up with those kinds of choices. Yeah.
I mean, you look at what happened with Cory Booker the other night and the 12 other Democrats who voted against Bernie and Amy Klobuchar's bill to reimport prescription drugs from Canada. I mean, in the old days, he would be speaking to an empty floor on C-SPAN in the dead of night. But today, with the internet, that thing was Facebook shared, it was tweeted, and it was memed within hours. And his presidential chances for 2020 are finished. Yeah, hold on a second. Keep talking. I'm going to open up my umbrella. For those of you who aren't seeing it, it just started raining. So,
okay, I'll keep talking. That Cory Booker's vote, I do think the internet has changed the rules to some degree, to a large degree. Not only did the internet spread the word right away that Booker and 12 Democrats had voted against this bill that would have allowed Americans to purchase prescription drugs from Canada. But also, we learned almost right away that Booker had taken almost $400,000 from these interests and took more money, I believe, from the big pharmaceutical companies than any other senator, Democrat or Republican. How are we doing?
Okay, so all right, so here we are going to point it towards me.
Okay.
Point the mic towards me.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to do this interview together here in the rain under the umbrella. Just trying to, I know this supposed iPhone is supposed to be waterproof, but I don't know about the microphone. Anyway, so I wanted to ask you, Tim, there's a banner over there because I'm here with Nick Brana, who was Bernie's senior staffer. He was part of our revolution, but he left. He was one of the half of the staff that left when Jeff Weaver took it over. We've got a new campaign called Draft Bernie for a People's Party, because we basically don't believe that the Democratic Party can reform itself. So what do you think? I mean, Keith Ellison has already started, he, as you know, he endorsed Steve Battelle, the billionaire, as opposed to Dwight Bullard, who was the Bernie-crat candidate. He also apparently is backing off on reinstating the ban on lobbyists that Debbie Wasserman Schultz got rid of. He's talking about possibly giving Bernie's list over to the Democratic Party, which we all think would be disastrous. What are your thoughts on that?
I think we need to reinstitute the ban on corporate lobbyist donations to the DNC right away. I watched the Huffington Post debate between the 7 DNC chair candidates, and really it was only Sally Boynton Brown who was very clear on it. She really gets it, that if we ban corporate money from the DNC, it should resonate with the base, the grassroots of the Democratic Party, who will step up and donate in small donations online. That's what happened in my campaign. In my campaign, I renounced corporate contributions. I said I wouldn't take a penny, and we never did. And instead, the grassroots stepped up and showered us with small donations that added up. I was disappointed in Keith Ellison's response to the question, too. It was something along the lines that personally he thinks we should reinstitute the ban, but he'll let the DNC decide it for itself. Now, letting the DNC decide it when the DNC is dominated by corporate lobbyist superdelegates and awash in corporate money is not the answer.
Now, do you think that Keith Ellison is basically doing this because it's only the DNC members that get to vote on his nomination, and so therefore he's trying to curry favor with them, and that perhaps if he gets elected, he's going to go back to being the true progressive that he always was?
Well, that is the hope. It does seem to me that if he wants to get elected DNC chair, he's got to be very cautious right now. And you mentioned he reached out and helped Stephen Battelle. He made calls on behalf of Stephen Battelle, and so did Cory Booker. So that was very disconcerting to progressives in Florida to see Ellison get involved in that way. And, again, he needs the votes of DNC delegates. He's going to curry favor with them. If he gets in that way, will he owe favors to them? Will he be able to break with them? Again, I was disappointed in his answer at the Huffington Post debate because it implied that he'll sit back and let the DNC run itself, perhaps.
So what do you think of our campaign to draft Bernie for to draft Bernie for a People's Party? Because we don't think that the Democratic Party is going to be able to reform itself. And Nick wrote a really long article in the Huffington Post a couple of months ago in which he laid out the case, basically saying that, people are saying it's easier to reform an existing party than start a new one. He had his answers to that. He said, as far as the Green Party, he has his answers to why that's not going to be the answer. The campaign is not to actually start the party or do a platform. That would be something that Bernie would do. The campaign is to draft him because we feel at this point in time he's the only person in America that could actually make a successful third party, because he would get half the Democrats, a good percentage of the independents, and even some Republicans. What do you think of a campaign like this?
Well, I would vote for Bernie if he was on starting a new party. Look, I ran against the head of the DNC, and I ran against her in the Democratic primary. So mine was an effort to reform the Democratic Party from within. If I run against Wasserman Schultz again, I'll have the choice of running as a Democrat or running as an independent. And it's too soon to know even if I'll run against her again or some other campaign. I think progressives need to press on all fronts. I respect those who are trying to stay within the Democratic Party and reform it from within, but that is a Herculean task. I also think progressives who are organizing through the Green Party or trying to form a new People's Party, God bless them. I'm all for it. You take a look at what the Tea Party did. Tea Party really helped push the Republican Party in a distinct direction. It never became a party in the sense of putting candidates up in elections, but it still was an effort that had a very big impact on the Republican Party.
Although I would say that I was around during Occupy, and it was shortly before that the Tea Party started. And I remember some early forums with original Tea Party members, and they and Occupy shared the same dissatisfaction with the bailout of the banks and the TARP money. And the Tea Party, I think, got co-opted in the summer of 2009 by Americans for Prosperity, which is an AstroTurf group of the Koch brothers, in which they paid, for buses to bus these people into the town hall meetings of the Democrats who were advocating for Obamacare. So I feel that the Tea Party really got co-opted from what it was, because I remember we shared a lot of goals, getting rid of the Fed and getting out of foreign wars, and I don't really think that the Republican Party today has that agenda. And I feel that Trump, he won on sort of a con game, because he said those things to his the people that voted for him. And I feel that, he's putting in so many billionaires into his cabinet, including people that actually are supportive of the TPP, which he ran against. So, we're here to occupy this inauguration, and I'm wondering what you think is going to happen with Trump and his movement going forward.
Well, first, what you said about the Tea Party is absolutely accurate, and I think that's what we have to be careful of if there is a People's Party, that it doesn't get co-opted the way the Tea Party got co-opted. Moving forward, yes, Trump has surrounded himself with corporate lobbyists. He said he was going to drain the swamp. Instead, you see the swamp is still quite strong here in Washington and will be under a Trump administration. So it's, in some ways, it's more transparent, perhaps, than what was happening under Obama. You look at Obama's record, and as you mentioned, fracking and pipelines really took off, so he catered to the fossil fuel industry. And yet, because he could give a lot of speeches about climate change and have the Paris Accords, it made it look like, that was the mask, right? With Trump, I think the mask is really torn off maybe a bit more, and that's a good thing. I take a lot of hope out of the fact that our progressive movement grew an awful lot in 2016. And while we didn't win, a lot of it was because of the rigging of elections against Bernie and others. But the movement keeps growing stronger and stronger. So I'm very hopeful that, looking forward, the pendulum is going to shift, but we have to keep working hard to shift it.
Yeah, you probably know that in California, Bernie-crats ran in the Assembly District delegate elections for the California Democratic Party. And after the election, we organized slates. I didn't run because like I said, I'm an activist on the outside. But a lot of my comrades did, and we swept. We got about 60% of the elected delegates. Now, granted, the elected delegates are only 1/3 of all the delegates. But, we had a conference call the other night, which I organized and moderated, and we talked about how we're going to possibly run candidates for state assembly and state senate in 2018 and take out some of these corporate Dems that we have in California. Because in California, the Republicans have no power. Democrats have a supermajority, but we have a problem is with corporate Democrats. Like I fought a bill that was like this faux bill. It was supposed to be a fracking regulatory bill, but all it was it provided notification, 30 days notification, disclosure of the chemicals, but not the concentrations and the formulas, and also a study. Like we need another study to show us that fracking is bad. So what happened was there was a good fracking moratorium bill in the same session of the legislature, but a lot of the corporate Dems used this bill as political cover to say, oh, I'm not voting for Holly Mitchell's bill to have a moratorium because I'm voting for Fran Pavley's bill instead. And Fran Pavley was considered, and I can't tell you how many times I heard this phrase, the best friend environmentalists have in Sacramento. So this was a real problem, and so we're going to be working. We also talked about an idea that I had, which is to start a citizens ALEC. In other words, why should it just be the top 100 corporations that write these bills and give them to conservative legislators? Why don't we have progressive activists write bills and give them to progressive legislators? So what do you think of that idea?
It's a fantastic idea. It really is. And, you've put your finger on what the central problem is, perhaps, is that there are so many corporate Democrats dominating the scene. You're familiar with Brand New Congress, I suppose.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, so many of the congressional districts have been gerrymandered, and probably 80 to 90% of them are generally safely either Democratic or Republican. So if you don't mount a strong primary challenge, you could kiss goodbye any real semblance of accountability. So I think this is very important. And in fact, I got involved a little bit in those delegate elections in California. I gave a shout out on social media for one of the slates in Orange County where I had lived years ago. Actually, I was involved in Occupy LA, so we were probably both there at the same time.
Yeah, do you remember the teach-in in November with Robert Reich?
I do, yes.
Yeah, I was one of the organizers of that.
And Bill Black was there?
Yeah, I got him. I booked him.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I was teaching a workshop to the People's Collective University there at Occupy LA, a workshop on reforming the Federal Reserve and Wall Street.
Oh, this is awesome.
And what you said was really true. What I found at Occupy was there were an awful lot of folks who were on the right of the spectrum. Tea Party people, Ron Paul people, they wanted to end the Fed. You had lots of people on the left there who wanted to end the Fed. I talked about let's mend the Fed. Let's take the Fed back over.
Yeah.
Let's have a central bank, but let it really be controlled and owned by the people.
Right, public banks. So Ellen Brown was one of our panelists, and she talked about a public bank. She's become a friend of mine. And I'm actually talking, well, the three of us are in conversation, me, her, and John Chung, who's our state treasurer, who is running for governor. And I told John, I said, I'm going to help get the Bernie-crats behind you if you come out for a ban on fracking, single-payer health care, a public bank, and free college and universities. So, again, that's the time to hold their feet to the fire. Like everybody was saying, oh, you know, we'll hold our nose and vote for Hillary, and then we'll hold her feet to the fire. Doesn't work that way. You hold someone's feet to the fire before you give them, you know, your vote.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm good friends with Ellen Brown as well. I've known her for years. I spoke at a big conference they had on public banking up in at Dominguez College, I believe it was. And
I was there. I covered it for my YouTube channel.
Oh, fantastic. That's great. I was one of the speakers, and I'm all for public banks. And I know there's efforts to do this in around Oakland, around Mendocino County, all over California and all over the country. There are efforts to start launching public banks, and we need to. One of the banks that we point to as the model, really the model, is the Bank of North Dakota. Now, what's disconcerting is the Bank of North Dakota has invested in DAPL, in the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Yeah.
So once we have public institutions, we have to make sure we keep their feet to the fire.
Right. Now, what do you think about this trend towards privatizing education? That's the fourth issue. My main things are TPP, fracking, net neutrality, which we won, and we're going to have to win it again because Trump's going to appoint a head of the FCC who is going to try to overturn net neutrality. And without a free and open internet, we have nothing. So that's a big issue, but also the privatization of education. I mean, if you get these charter schools, there's a billionaire, a liberal billionaire in Los Angeles by the name of Eli Broad, and he wants to take 50% of LAUSD charter. And so we have to fight that, and I know that's a big problem in Florida. What can you say about that in your state?
It's a terrible problem in Florida and all over the country. And you look at Trump's new education secretary, somebody who's been for chartered schools in Michigan. And I heard a national public radio report about Michigan's privatization of their education system and how their scores are declining dramatically.
Yeah,
so
Detroit is like the worst. Detroit is the worst public school in the nation as a result of that.
You know, what we need, and I talked about this during my campaign, is to rebuild our public institutions, and that includes public education. You know, in 1960, John Kennedy was talking about the need to have the federal government subsidize teacher salaries, local school teachers in the public school systems. And we did not go that path. So when the 2008 financial crisis occurred, over the next 2 years afterwards, 700,000 public school teachers lost their jobs in this country. You know, if we don't take care of our public schools, they decline, and then it opens us up to this false answer of privatization.
Yes, and what's worse is we have to get rid of the new markets tax credit. That's a credit that gives hedge fund billionaires 39% tax credit if they invest in a charter school in a poor neighborhood, and that charter school is still there 7 years later. So all these hedge fund guys in New York who are pretending to be so concerned about the poor students, they're really concerned about their poor pocketbooks, or I should say their rich pocketbooks. So that should be something that Bernie should introduce, is a bill to overturn the new market tax credit.
I'm all for that. That sounds great. You know, you take a look at these fortunes. We talk about the 1% a lot. The problem is really not the 1%. It's more like the 1/10 of 1%. They're the ones who have been making out like bandits, and it's a crony capitalism. They're not making their fortunes and keeping their fortunes and expanding their fortunes by playing fair. In industry after industry, you see market concentration levels that we haven't seen in decades. And, you know, it's monopolistic, it's cartel-like, and it's illegitimate wealth. And, you know, in the past, you look at World War II as an example, you know, there was concern that the wealthy were getting outsized profits from the war, you could say. And we have a wartime economy now. It hasn't ended, but we don't have wartime taxation. So returning to the Clinton year tax levels is not enough. We really need to increase the taxes on people, maybe incomes over $10 million a year or something like that, but really increase it an awful lot. And then use that money to rebuild our public institutions.
Absolutely. Well, they're getting ready to march, folks, and I really enjoyed having this conversation with Tim Canova, and I'm sure we're going to get him as a guest on the Robust Opposition soon. Right, Tim?
Absolutely. It's great to be with you. Thank you so much.
Okay. So I'm going to sign off for now because it's a little bit raining here, and when we get situated...
Well, I really enjoyed doing that interview. The conditions were interesting. I was holding the umbrella in one hand and Tim Canova was holding the mic, but between the two of us, we got a lot of good content. So I wanted to let viewers know that this is going to be the last episode of the Robust Opposition on YouTube on Sunday mornings. I am taking the show to Facebook, where I think I might be able to get more viewers because Facebook Live my live streams are more viewed than this particular show. So I am going to be concentrating on my live streams and occasional interviews using a new platform called BTV. I may only be able to do one interview at a time, but as you can see, I get very good guests. I mean, just today on our show, we had a director, a very high up official from a very major nonprofit organization that's been around for decades, the ACLU. We also had an activist, an Occupy person, socialist, alternative member turned city councilor, Shama Suwan, as well as a professor and a candidate for office. Unfortunately, he didn't win, Tim Canova. So I know a lot of people in the country, a lot of activists, and a lot of organizations who are resisting and have been resisting the corporatocracy even before Donald Trump. This is an ongoing fight that does not depend on who is in the White House, unless, of course, that person is Bernie Sanders. So I just wanted to let you know about some upcoming live streams that I'll be doing this afternoon. In a couple of hours, I'm going to be interviewing Steve Early, who wrote a book called Refinery Town. We're doing a book party for him at my home, and I'm going to be interviewing him about his book. And this was about how 3 candidates from the Richmond Progressive Alliance took on the Chevron-backed candidates in Richmond, California. And even though they were outspent 20-1, they won. And it was based on doing old-fashioned community organizing and representing the people. So I'll be talking to him. Tune in around 2:45. I may go live then or at 3, depending on how long it takes people to arrive. You know, people are always late. Then this evening, I'm going to be covering an event called the Tar Sands Valve Turners Civil Disobedience Today Forum in Los Angeles. And this is 5 climate organizers who in October turned the emergency shutoff valves on the 5 pipelines that carry oil from the Canadian tar sands into the United States. It was an unprecedented act of nonviolent direct action that shut down 15% of US crude oil imports for nearly a day. So that's going to be, these 2 events are going to be happening today and this evening. And tomorrow, I'm going to be doing an interview with Nick Brana, who is the founder of Draft Bernie for a People's Party. Don't know what time that's going to be on, but if you check my page is public, Lauren Steiner on Facebook. You will see, I will announce when it will be. Tuesday, I'm most probably going to cover an event at Dianne Feinstein's office that a friend of mine is organizing. And it relates to, let's see, I know the organizer from Occupy Venice, and it's a multi-organization, multi-issue rally at her office, asking her to hold a town hall to address important issues. So if you live in Los Angeles, you can come to that. It's at the corner of Sepulveda and Santa Monica, Tuesday at noon. And this is part of the whole Move On Working Families Party, multi-organization coalition to host events at senators' offices every Tuesday. Friday, I'm going to be covering the general strike. The Jessica Salins for City Council campaign is organizing an event at Pershing Square. And the general strike is where they have called for people not to go to work, not to go to school, and not to purchase anything. So that's going to be happening on Friday. And then on Saturday is going to be, let me make sure it's Saturday and not Sunday. It's going to be the Immigration March, also at Pershing Square. It is called, yes, it is Saturday. Let me tell you what it's called. It's called the Free the People, Immigration for All. So I'm going to be at these things. I'm also going to set up a GoFundMe or something like that to cover the cost of these live streaming. I basically used to spend 2 gigabytes for my normal use. Now I have 12 gigabytes, and it costs me $50 more a month to do the live streaming. Not to mention, every time I go downtown, I pay anywhere between $7 to $14 to park my car. So, and I just bought a really nifty light and a clip and a grip so that I can cover things at night. So I'm going to be setting this up and sharing it, and hopefully people will support my work. Dave Conan has agreed to graciously restream what my live streams and some of these interviews as he is interested in them and as he is available. And I've really enjoyed working with you, Dave, these past few months on the show. Do you want to say a few words, or shall I just say goodbye? Okay, well, folks, that's the perils of live TV. Dave has done a Herculean job pulling this off all these months. He has some great shows on Our Revolution TV. Project Sanity is one that I know about. And he's also been live streaming a lot of events here in Los Angeles. So continue to support the channel. If you're not already a subscriber, subscribe to it and tell your friends. So thank you very much, and signing off for today, this has been Lauren Steiner for The Robust Opposition.